Father, we ask for good minds. We ask for safety this week, a good spirit of worship later on this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Man, I've been studying a lot about, the crucifixion, the resurrection, all that stuff. I guess the reality is that, yes, Jesus was resurrected on the first day of the week, which actually the Bible doesn't, I can't remember anywhere in the Bible where it says that. But he was resurrected after a Saturday Sabbath. The thing is, Sunday started sundown Saturday. So he probably wasn't resurrected at morning light Sunday morning, but let's say after sundown Saturday. When you think 3 days and 3 nights, and that the Essenes always celebrated Passover on Wednesday, which meant the Seder was Tuesday night, which meant since Jesus apparently kept an Essene Passover, since his disciples had to follow somebody carrying water, and only the Essenes carried water because everyone else was married and had wives that did it. The Essenes didn't get married. So he kept that Tuesday night Passover, and then the next night was the Passover for everybody else. That's why he could both partake at the Passover and be the Passover lamb the next day. It's the only thing that makes sense, and that would have been Wednesday that week. Wednesday. So he's in the ground, he's in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. Wednesday night, Thursday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday. And after the sun goes down Saturday night, he can raise. And the women did not see him rise. They found an empty tomb. Yes?
It just occurred to me that there is an interval between the time he actually rose from the dead and the time the stone was found to be rolled away, because nobody knew when he rose up, just that he rose up. I mean, he could have rose up 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning.
That's the thing. They didn't see him rise from the dead. They found an empty tomb. And it's interesting that when I taught Christian school in San Antonio, one of my teachers, co-workers, a teacher, was a Muslim convert to Christianity from Turkey. And he went to one of the 3 Messianic Jewish congregations in San Antonio, and he said that they keep the Hebrew, that Hebrew holiday calendar, that's their liturgical year, although he didn't use that term. And it ties in with the Bible. See, that's what Messianic Judaism does. It ties in with the Bible instead of all these other holidays added later by Christians at a time when paganism was taking over the church. Easter? Yeah, the resurrection's one thing, but rabbits and eggs? That's pagan. There's actually a story to it. The guy in this town has told me a couple of times. I just can't remember it all. But I've been reading that, Constantine got together at the Council of Nicaea and Nicaea. They were trying to get away from anything Jewish, so they brought in Easter to replace Passover. I mean, they were just trying to kick Judaism out completely. I mean, the early church was horrendously anti-Semitic, and actually most of Christianity throughout the last 2,000 years has been anti-Semitic. Generally, these days, evangelical Christians, for the most part, are not anti-Semitic, but this is something new. The church has been the Jews' worst enemy for the last 2,000 years, and I'm talking pogroms. That's a Russian word. When you go in to a community, burning, looting, maiming, killing, raping. And in fact, the one in 1903, they got photographs of what it was like afterwards. They interviewed women who, their fiancés don't want to marry them now that they've been raped. I mean, that one is so well documented. Kishinev in Russia. But there's, our liturgical year, not so much our theology in many ways, although replacement theology is part of that. You know, this theory that whatever promises God made to Israel that have not been fulfilled have been transferred to the church. You couldn't come up with that today very easily, but old heresies die hard. So you get Israel, and so many Jews living there, and the military that no one can beat, and an economy that's, the highest tech country in the world right now, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they don't know how to explain it, except the United States helped them or something like that. But back in the days when that theory was developed, Israel was pretty much gone. But it's interesting when you look at things through the liturgical year of Leviticus 23. Exodus 23 introduces you to the 3 pilgrim feasts: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. Leviticus 23 introduces you to those plus the whole 7 feasts. It starts out talking about the Sabbath. Now there's also a Sabbath year and a Jubilee year. That comes in Leviticus, Jubilee is Leviticus 25. But you've got the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, and later you get the Sabbath year and the Jubilee. But you've also got 7 other Sabbaths right in Leviticus 23. Could be the first day of a holiday, it could be the first and last day of a holiday. And it usually isn't called Sabbath, but it's the same thing. It says you don't do any servile work. So that's the Sabbath. So the week Jesus was crucified, he was taken off the cross. I think it's John mentions that Sabbath was a high day. In other words, it wasn't Saturday. He was taken off the cross because the next day was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a Sabbath, according to Leviticus 23. I was reading last night those 7 Sabbaths. Now, usually they're not called Sabbath, but it's, God says you don't do any servile works. The same thing as the Sabbath. And they were known as Sabbaths. So he was taken off the cross for that, and not because the next day was Saturday. Now, the women came after Saturday. And when you think about it, how did they find their way in the dark? Because it was the moon was a waning gibbous. It's full moon at Passover. So a few days later, it's going to be a waning gibbous, which means most of the moon's there, but not quite. But it also is going to stay risen a little past sunup. So they could find their way without torches if there was no cloud cover. Very interesting, though, when you look at the arguments for a liturgical year based not on the church tradition, but based on the Bible itself. Because typologically, it all fits in. You took in a lamb for 4 days before you sacrificed it for Passover. Well, Jesus was inspected for 4 days. He came in on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. He's arrested Tuesday night. And then Wednesday, he's still on trial. And then they crucify him. So that was his 4 days. I mean, all the typology fits when you look at it as God gave it in the Bible instead of what church tradition has done later. The early church councils were great with the Trinity, the deity of Christ. They had a lot of it together, and even deciding what belonged in the Bible. But they blew it when it came to anything Jewish. Anyway, Judges 13. Well, I'm just going to mention, I brought my notes to Judges 13, which I had forgotten last week. You don't have to really turn there. Turn to Judges 15. But anyway, Manoah means place of rest. Think Noah actually means rest. Samson is the son child, like the different translations of Samson. Son child, like the sun, bright sun. It's from the word Shemesh, which means sun. In other words, in Hebrew roots, you usually have 3 letters to a root. Shemesh. The N on Samson is a suffix that they often add to Hebrew words to make them into nouns. or to make them into something else rather. Like in Hebrew, when Moses had that brazen serpent, it was Nehoshet, is bronze, maybe copper. Of course, bronze is, what is it? Copper and zinc. No, copper and tin. Copper and zinc gives you brass. So you just add, and you can change the vowel sounds pretty easily in Hebrew. So Nehushtan is what it is called later on. A king took it down, they were worshiping it, and he called it Nehushtan. In other words, this is nothing but a bunch of metal. In Israel, my second time in the classroom, we went through that form. When you add that N at the end, that N sound, in Hebrew it's a final nun. And we had several examples. So what that king was saying was, taking Nehoshet and saying Nehushtan, adding that N. Of course, it changes the vowel sounds. But in other words, this is nothing but a bunch of bronze. Don't you guys understand this? Or copper, whatever it was. So it's Samson, they just add the N, Shemesh. It basically comes from sun. Zoar is leprosy, scab, hornet, town of hornets. In Deuteronomy 7:20, God says he's going to send the hornet to chase people out of the promised land. And the leprosy is actually, it's a bit different in Hebrew. It's the same root. So it probably really does mean hornet. See, you try to look this stuff up and people put in their theories as to what the word means. And I was at the Dead Sea, first time there. We had lunch. And the best lunch back in those days was called schnitzel. It's breaded white chicken breast, and it's delicious. The only time meals got better in Israel were maybe Shabbat, Friday night, when you get the rarity of like red meat or something. But schnitzel, so they typically give you schnitzel and pickles. I forget what the carb was. So I'm outside eating, and this wasp comes. I've never seen that particular breed before. It's got like a greenish yellow tail, and then another, and another, and another. By the time we were four there, I just left the meal and went on and got another one. Probably should have just pushed them away. But you can understand that wasps, if that's what it means by the hornet driving people out. Actually, let's look at Deuteronomy 7:20 for a second. Moreover, the Lord thy God will send the hornet among them until they that are left and hide themselves from thee be destroyed. If it's anything like what happened to me at the Dead Sea, yeah, it's just I can understand it. Now, Judges, and the reason I mention this is there was this in Judges 13:2, and there was a certain man of Zorah of the family of the Danites. And that's what the word for leprosy is almost the same, but that's really the word for hornet. And even leprosy, which is also called Hansen's disease, Leviticus 13, it's real leprosy, but it also talks about leprosy in the clothes and leprosy in your house, reddish and greenish streaks. Well, if anyone's had to clean a shower, you see mold that can be reddish, pinkish and green, it grows. There's actually a mold that grows on bread that's reddish, and that is where host desecration comes from. It's one of the blood libels. In other words, you've got the host, the Eucharist, in a Catholic church, and it sits, and it's a particular, I got it at home on my presentations on the Jewish background of the Bible, what the actual biological, Linnean term means, Genesis species of this particular organism, and it's red. So they come in and find the bread with some red on, and the Jews, and they believe in transubstantiation, so the Jews came in and beat the bread, which is absolutely silly, because number one, they wouldn't do that. Number two, the Jews didn't believe in Jesus anyway, never mind, medieval Europe, never mind transubstantiation, so why would they? But then they go out, pogrom, kill some Jews. It's the way it was. But you can see leprosy being on a person, but you can also see it used for just different molds and stuff. If you ever had the problem in your house. There was a particular ranch in Texas where they laid down new linoleum, and this was a long time ago. And it was some kind of mold, and it just took over the house. Actually, in Texas, I suffered from mold, remember in Lubbock? That was coming through an opening where water pipes came through in an apartment complex. It would make me nauseous, and then I'd leave and go visit my parents for a few days in Massachusetts, and it would go away. I'd come home again, and it acted up again, so I knew that was an allergy. Now, Samson is born in Judges 13, gets married, born in Judges 13, gets married in Judges 14. Samson's marriage, and his wife's given to someone else. And Judges 15, we're going to start today. Judges 15, 13, 14, 15, and 16 are Samson. Judges 15, verse 1. But it came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid. In other words, a baby goat, not what we call a kid. And he said, I will go into my wife into the chamber. But her father would not suffer him to go in. And her father said, I verily thought that thou hadst utterly hated her. Therefore I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. And Samson said concerning them, now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and took firebrands, and turned tail to tail, and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines, and burnt up both the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and olives. Then the Philistines said, who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. Now, I want you to look at your handouts and see that chiasm. Okay? Othniel is the first judge. He marries a godly Israelite wife who urges him for good things. He had a brave and godly father-in-law, Caleb, in Judges 1:12. Samson is the seventh judge in this chiasm. Remember, the first is like the seventh, the second's like the sixth, the third is like the fifth, and the fourth is sort of the mountaintop of the chiasm. Marital problems with a Philistine wife, a cowardly father-in-law, the wife and the father-in-law die, and then later, we haven't even gotten to this yet, he's got two more pagan women relationships. So you see that everything's going from good to bad, but they mirror each other in a way that only God can do. Verse 7, and Samson said unto them, though ye have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock Etam. He's acting like a kid. You did this to me, I'm going to do that to you. Tit for tat, they say, based on an old Dutch expression, dit voor dat, which means this for that. Then the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi, which means jawbone. And the men of Judah said, why are ye come up against us? And they answered, to bind Samson are we come up, to do to him as he hath done to us. I guess they're acting a little bit like that too. Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock Etam and said to Samson, knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this? That's great just being occupied by a foreign country, isn't it? What is this that thou hast done unto us? And he said unto them, as they did unto me, so have I done unto them. I get a little note here that I wrote, Proverbs 24:29. So let's take a look at it. Of course, Proverbs was written later, but Proverbs 24:29. Say not, I will do so to him as he hath done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. So, interesting. Proverbs. I'm just doing this to revamp my notes a little. And they said unto him, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that ye will not fall upon me yourselves. See, he had power against the Philistines, but he wasn't going to mess with his own people. By the way, this power only came on him from time to time. He wasn't some big muscle man. It seems that way when you look at the artwork, but it's when the Spirit of the Lord came on him that he had the supernatural strength. And they spake unto him, saying, no, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hand. But surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. New cords are hard to break. It's when they get old that sometimes break. Yeah. Guys, remember the days of rope when it would get wet and start rotting and break. I mean, these days everything seems to be made out of nylon and strong plastic. And I'm not saying that was all cotton rope. I remember the days of cotton shoelaces, by the way. But it was ropes, and probably was a lot of cotton, if not completely, and they would break easily. These are new cords. And when he was come unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. That's what it took. And the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from off his hands. And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps of the jawbone of an ass have I slain 1,000 men. And it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking that I cast away the jawbone out of his hand, and he called that place Ramat Lehi, the high place of Lehi. It was called Lehi, but this is Ramat Lehi. Now, Samson uses a pun, which does not get translated. He uses the same word for heap as he does for ass. Again, the Ramat Lehi means elevation of the jawbone. You know, Rama is a high place. Ramat is high place of. And yeah, it's a pun. It does not get translated. I don't know any language it gets translated into. What's so funny? Yeah. And he was sore athirst, and called on the Lord, and said, thou hast given this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant. And now shall I die for thirst, and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised? But God clave an hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Therefore he called the name of the place En HaKoreh, which is in Lehi unto this day. And En HaKoreh means fountain of the crier, because he cried out. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Now, what is Samson suffering from? And besides the fact he's supposed to be judging Israel, and he's not quite doing it right. Adrenal fatigue. He's just won a victory, and he says, shall I die for thirst? Here are modern day examples of adrenal fatigue. In other words, your adrenal glands just kind of quit on you. Climb a mountain. Yeah, we finally made it to the top. I was involved with this fundraising thing. We climbed Mount Washington to raise money for some guys that wanted to go to Australia and New Zealand on a mission trip. And coming down, you made it to the top. Of course, they got the weather observatory, but also a visitor center up there. Coming down, it was going up. We hit thunderstorm. We went up Tuckerman Ravine. So you hit a sign that says if there are thunderstorms, turn back. It's Thunderstorm Junction. Of course, thundering and lightning, and we kept going anyway, which I think most climbers do. There is a reason, because Mount Washington goes partway into the jet stream. That's why it's so crazy up there. Whereas the big mountain around here, you don't have that kind of weather. And you get 3 storm systems that sort of coincide in that area, but also it's up into part of the jet stream. Coming down, it should have been easier, right? We made it, we gotta get down. Now we did have an injury, and it's adrenal fatigue. After a hard push to finish college, maybe, you take extra credits, whatever, I gotta get out, you push. Victory, and then there's a biochemical reason for that. You might win an important athletic competition. You're all psyched up and everything, everyone's yelling and screaming, and afterwards it's not just tired from the, running around a field somewhere or a basketball court. It's adrenal fatigue. Here is an example. Thou hast given this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die for thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised. Let's look at other examples in the Bible. 1 Kings 19:4. There are different extremes that you run into in the pulpit. One is a guy who's never been to college is going to give medical advice. That's wrong. He thinks he knows everything about nutrition or something because of the latest thing he read. The other extreme is when people completely ignore what the human body does. Both ends of the continuum are wrong. Let's at least take a look at this. 1 Kings 19:4. This is Elijah. He has just won the victory over the prophets of Baal among Carmel, which is an interesting place to visit these days. It's in Haifa, or Haifa as they call it in English. Right beside the sea. You wonder where they got all that, the time of famine, where in the world, in drought, where in the world did they get all that water that they put on the altar? Well, you're beside the ocean. And it's a beautiful place to visit. Baha'is have their international headquarters there, and it's, though I don't believe in their religion, they got a nice place to look at as you go up the hill. But anyway, he himself, this is Elijah, went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and said, actually, let's go from verse 1 so we see what's really going on. Start at verse 1, 1 Kings 19. Remember, he's just won that victory. And Ahab, that's the king, told Jezebel, his wicked wife, all that Elijah had done, and with all how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. That's the prophets of Baal. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, so let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. So you got 24 hours to live, Elijah. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, it is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. There's adrenal fatigue. He wins this great victory. Jezebel, who doesn't even see him, says boo, and he goes into suicidal depression. He doesn't try suicide. He says, God, take my life. And what happened was, his ministry was going to be over anyway. So he went and anointed Elisha to take his place. Let's look at another example. Jonah 4, verse 3. Since it's a small book, it goes Hosea, Joel, Amos, Jonah 4:3. Of course, y'all know the book of Jonah. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah. Obadiah. 4, yeah, Jonah 4:3.
Okay.
This is Jonah talking. Now therefore, O Lord, take, I beseech thee, my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. Okay? What happened was Jonah had a great victory. The people of Nineveh repented. And Jonah was angry. I mean, they repented, so God repented. What logic is there to be mad that people repent and then God says, I'm not going to destroy them? He's not even thinking logically. He might be a little bit. He might be thinking, fine, now the Ninevites can come and destroy us. It would have been better if you wiped them off the face of the earth. Think of what's happened in politics in our lifetimes, Cold War with Russia, now a Cold War with China. Well, God, it would be so much easier if you just wiped them all out. These people repented. God repented. And Jonah's upset. You know what Jonah's probably gone through is adrenal fatigue. Verse 8, Jonah 4:8. And it came to pass when the sun did arise that God prepared a vehement east wind. See, Jonah made a booth in verse 5, protect him from the sun. And God destroyed that. God prepared a gourd and made it to come up over Jonah, that I might be a shadow over his head to deliver him from his grief. Jonah was exceedingly glad of the gourd. Verse 6, verse 7. But God prepared a worm when the morning rose the next day, and it smote the gourd that it withered. And it came to pass when the sun did arise that God prepared a vehement east wind, and the sun beat upon the head of Jonah, that he fainted and wished in himself to die, and said, it is better for me to die than to live. See that? That is adrenal fatigue. And that's what Samson's going through. He wins this victory, the victory's won, and you've got to be careful with adrenal fatigue. After a great victory, be careful. Because biochemically, you're being weakened, and you're likely to make stupid decisions. I had a strong push in college my last semester to get through and to try to do well in some very hard courses. And you're a chemistry major, including not being a teaching assistant, which I didn't have to be because I was an undergrad. And I had been a teaching assistant, and to get through this course in instrumental analytical chemistry, taught very well by a very good professor. Our professors were tremendous. I knew it was going to be a lot of work, like 20 hours a week. So I said, okay, this semester I'm not going to be a TA. And so I lost that $1,000 I would have had as TAing freshman chemistry labs. And I pushed, and I pushed, and I got through, and I did well. And then I graduated. My parents came up for the graduation. When I went back to college, 5,000 miles from where they were, because they were in Massachusetts and I was in Alaska, my mother said, if you graduate, we'll come up for the graduation. I would not find out 2 years later that she was kidding. She didn't think I was going to make it. Because I'd already dropped out once, and here I was a little bit older going back. But so she came up, my father came up, my grandmother was going to, but she was getting old, so when push came to shove, she just decided not to go. It's hard for people that age to travel. One of my brothers came up, and the other one had to study for law school exams. And then there's another brother I got, but he had Down syndrome. So, it's a great victory. They come up, and they fly up. This was Fairbanks, and then they fly me down to Anchorage. Then they drove me to Solid Rock Bible Camp, in Soldotna down on the Kenaites, a few hours drive, and let me off. I was going to be a counselor that summer. It was still like mid-May, but they had rental camps like Soldotna Elementary School and stuff, and I could help out. They knew me there at Solid Rock because I'd worked there before. And when camping summer season hit, adrenal fatigue hit. I would say things, it's like I have to look back, I can't believe I could say these things. I mean, it's just, I was so out of it, just in the adrenal fatigue. Plus, there was a plane crash in the area that killed 4 locals from 4 different families. Tragic, there's quite a tragic story behind it. A lot of plane crashes, those light planes, 4-seaters in Alaska. And that just, I think, had their effect on everybody, because we didn't have time to warn. By that time, the camping season had already started. And so that added to it. But the adrenal, as I look back at how I behaved that summer, as opposed to 2 summers before when I was a counselor, and I did a great job. I was introduced as the best counselor there. 2 years later, I'm there, and it's adrenal fatigue, and they asked me if I wanted to leave, because I couldn't get along with my boss, and I did something I wasn't supposed to. I went to see the nurse when I was told, no, you can't go see the nurse. I said, I know when the hours are, I'm going. And it was just, it was a mess. And, a lot of it was adrenal fatigue, and that's what Samson's going through. Now, Judges 16. Then went Samson to Gaza and saw there an harlot and went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither, and they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, in the morning when it is day, we shall kill him. Okay, so there's one of the 2 pagan relationships I mentioned. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city, and the 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of an hill that is before Hebron. Sometimes you hear it on the news. It's actually Hebron in Hebrew, and sometimes the news reporters get that right. Notice the chiasm. He took the gates of Hebron. Othniel's wife came from there. Remember? The first judge, his wife was from Hebron. So you see that chiasm again. Hebron on both sides of the chiasm. And it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sohak, whose name was Delilah. Now, that means delicate. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and said unto her, entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. And Delilah said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. And Samson said unto her, this is the first time, you got to count all these, if they bind me with 7 green whiffs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man. So, if you're like me, you go and look up what in the world is a whiff, because we think of whiff. But anyway, it's the type of cord. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green whiffs which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. It's interesting Samson should say that, because the dried ones would have been easier to break. I mean, this is plant material. It's like a branch, sort of. But he's just playing a game with her. He doesn't think she's going to win. Now there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber, and she said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he brake the withs as a thread of tow is broken when it toucheth the fire. So his strength was not known. Now, Samson should have known by then, this lady's out to get me. But he's just overconfident. Who else was overconfident, by the way? Anyone know? A real biblical hero. Joshua. Joshua 7, they go to fight at Ai. Just let a few thousand go up. It's no big deal. We'll take the city. Jericho was easy. We'll take this one. No prayer. And they lost. Joshua 9. the Gibeonites come and deceive Joshua into making a peace treaty, which the children of Israel had to keep. And it says, they asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. Even the greatest heroes in the Bible have their failings, except for two people. Anyone know the two major characters in the Bible that you never see a failing with? Anyone know? Jesus. Who else? Daniel. You don't see him doing anything wrong. Sometimes I think if he was really a eunuch, meaning they castrated him, God might have kind of felt sorry for him. Maybe I'm wrong. I could easily be wrong about that. But you don't see him having any failings. Even John the Baptist got to doubting when he was put in prison. By the way, you lose your freedom because you're in prison or you're held hostage, you can't think straight. My reference for this is kidnapped for my faith. In an incident that happened in 1978 in Newton, Massachusetts, when a Jewish guy was going to Jesus meetings, he got saved, and he engaged to a Gentile, and his father had him kidnapped after his wedding rehearsal on a Thursday night. And what's really dumb, but they were Orthodox Jews, they took him to New York, New Jersey, crossed state lines, became an FBI case. He escaped his kidnappers, then had to take his fiancée to Nevada where he can get married on the spot before his parents could declare him insane. Because at least back in those days, and it might still be true, if you were not yet 30 or married, your parents could declare you insane. So this is the best I remembered. I think I get all the details right because I've read that book twice. But it mentions in that book, what do you do if you're kidnapped? You can't think straight. You really can't. In fact, I won't even get into the prison system and how they deal with hostage taking. I won't reveal that, but you can't think straight. So, verse 11, he said unto her, if they bind me fast with new ropes that were never occupied, then shall I be weak and be as another man. In other words, something really strong. Delilah therefore took new ropes and bound him therewith and said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And there were liars in wait, abiding in the chamber, and he brake them from off his arms like a thread. And Delilah, I'm trying not to call Samson an idiot, but, and Delilah said unto Samson, hitherto thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Kind of reminds me of Hercules, in Greek mythology, really strong but not too bright. And Delilah said unto Samson, hitherto thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, if thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with a web. So, went and rolled a web, I looked it up. I still don't understand it completely because I've never actually seen a woman there with a loom, except maybe in some demonstration in a museum. But it has to do with the looms that they use, they make clothes with. And she fastened it with a pin.
Dreadlocks.
Huh?
Something like dreadlocks.
Well, they said he had 7 long locks of hair. And she fastened it with a pin and said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awaked out of his sleep and went away with a pin of the beam and with a web. And that's why I had to look it up. And, I've never seen one of these. Probably should have hit images on Google. And she said unto him, how canst thou say I love thee when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. Now for the 4th time. And it came to pass when she pressed him daily with the words and urged him so that his soul was vexed unto death. Hey, when he got married the first time, he fell for the same trick. A woman just pestering him, no offense to women, a woman just pestering him and pestering him and pestering him, and he gives in. Actually, the first time he did give in. And he gives in again. Okay, actually, if you go back in Judges 14 is when he gets married. 14, verse 16, and Samson's wife wept before him and said, thou dost hate me and lovest me not. Okay? In verse 17, he gives in. And she wept before him in 7 days while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him, and she told the riddle to the children of her people. So he's given in once, he's given in again. He's overconfident. Then he told her all this, verse 16, that he told her all his heart, and said unto her, there hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and shall become weak and be like any other man. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up this once, for he hath showed me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and brought money in their hand. And she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he woke out of his sleep, and said, I will go out as at the other times before, and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. This was not the new birth. This was what they call the unresting spirit. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes. So now he's blind, and brought him down to Gaza. It's one of the big 5 Philistine cities. And bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god. That's a fish god, by the way. The word dag in Hebrew means fish. And to rejoice. But of course the Philistines live in the ocean, so why not have a fish god? For they said, our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, that's Dagon, for they said, our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. And it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, that they said, call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld why Samson made sport. Samson called unto the Lord. I mean, they excavate these huge temples in that part of the world, Greece and the whole area. I mean, huge stone temples. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once the avenge of the Philistines from my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up, of the one with his right hand, and of the other with his left. So he's pushing on the pillars. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the Lord, and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Who else did more destruction to the kingdom of darkness in his death than in his life? Anyone know? Jesus. He did a lot of destruction to the kingdom of darkness when he was alive with all his miracles and healings, but he did a lot more. He won the victory on the cross. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zoah and Eshtaol, in the burying place of Manoah his father, who's obviously died by then, and he judged Israel 20 years. Any questions? Okay, Father, we ask for a good week and a good service. Now, in Jesus' name, amen.